If you had 100 shares of a, let's say the TQQ or any stock, and the value of that holding went up $1, how much wealthier are you? If you had 100 shares and it goes up $1 a share, how much wealthier are you?
Be $100, right?
You'd be $100 richer, right? So if they do a stock split and now you got 200 shares and it goes up $1, how much richer are you?
$200.
$200. So when you get when you have more shares, you can see how your wealth is going to grow faster, right?
Right.
And you know, this is a key reason. Let me tell you one of the reasons why people don't get ahead financially. Let's say you were a factory worker, right? And if you're a factory worker, you're going to go in and punch in on the clock and you punch out when you leave. And it says, how many hours did you work? Well, when you go home, you know, if we had a clock that was accumulating the wealth that we're making, all of a sudden the wealth clock stops, right? Because you unplugged from the time clock. So we have another clock over here, and this is if we add up how much gas we need every month, how much our utility bills, how much we pay in rent or mortgage, how much our life insurance is, our home insurance, our food bills. This is our consumption clock, and guess what never stops? The consumption clock. Our wealth clock stops because we unplugged. And so the simple thing is, to grow wealth, you have to develop income, wealth building that is not tied to your personal time. Your personal time is linear. You want to have wealth that is not linear, okay? That is not limited. If I said to you, Anthony, you are such an amazing guy. I can't find good people, but you're a hell of a guy. I'm going to pay you $1,000 an hour. And you go, wow, for $1,000 an hour, I'm not going to sleep. I'll work all day, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, if you're making $1,000 an hour, can you make $30,000 in a day?
No, you can't.
No, you can't. And so this is the reason why right here, pay attention, folks, because no matter how much you make, and most time you go, boy, if I could just earn more, if I could just earn more, you're probably not going to get paid $1,000 an hour. And even if you were paid $1,000 an hour, you can't make $30,000 a day or $50,000 a day. Why? Because you're making money tied to your personal time, and your personal time is limited. You can't work 30 hours a day. If you're selling me your life in increments of an hour, which is how a lot of people get paid, you run out of inventory to sell. Right? No one ever told you that, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it. But if I accumulate 10 shares, 20 shares, 1,000 shares, 5,000 shares. When I bought Cisco System back in 1993, I bought 200 shares. I had just sold my business, like you said you sold yours. And I had some money to invest. I bought Cisco Systems, bought 200 shares. It did a 2-for-1 split. And then I had 400 shares. And then it split again, and I had 800 shares. And then it split and had 1,600, and then 3,200. Then it did a weird kind of 3-for-5 or something. I ended up within 5 years having over 7,000 shares, okay? One day, Cisco, and you get these stocks that are kind of rock and roll stocks, Cisco went up $10. And I called my sister up and go, I've got to tell somebody I made $70,000 today in the market. Now remember, it seems impossible. Well, Terry, that's an esoteric question if I was paid $1,000 an hour, because that'll never happen. Even if you were paid $1,000, you couldn't make $30,000 in a day, but I made $70,000. Because my time wasn't, or my income, my wealth building wasn't tied to my personal time. That's why you want to invest.
Yeah, and to jump in there, now I've seen in police work, I've seen in the like coaching space, like nutrition space, where these ultra motivated people will spend hours and hours and hours driving and grinding and working so hard to do just that. But even if you hit the monetary amount that you're looking for, number one, it seems like it's never enough. And number two, you are absolutely dead, because I've seen people that have worked 24 hours straight for multiple days in a row to make the money that they wanted for a vacation, a car, pay bills off, whatever. And they are done. They are cooked. And if you do that for time after time, day after day, month after month, you get cancer and die. And so who gives a crap if you have the money? It ended up not being worth it anyway.
Well, and so let me tell you, here's the other thing. How good is your relationship going to be with your wife when you're stressed out like that? Are you enjoying life?
Right.
And how are you going to be when you're
a shift worker already?
How are you going to feel when Nick comes in and wakes you up when you've been up for 48 hours and you've been asleep for 30 minutes and he wakes you up? You know, right. Are you going to have a good relationship with your kid then? You know, that's not the way to make money, folks. And let me ask you this. How many of those people that you just mentioned that did that called up their insurance guy and said, can I get a better price on the car insurance? Can I get a better price on the home insurance? Is there anything we can do to bring that down and maybe trim $30, $50 a month? $50 a month is $600 a year. How many $5 decisions could you make in the course of a month? Instead of buying the $10 bottle of wine, I'll make do with the $5 bottle of wine. I'm still having a bottle of wine, but I just saved $5. If I have 2 bottles of wine a week, that's $10 times 4 weeks. There's $40. $40 times 12 is $480. I just saved almost $500 right there. That $600 and that $400, we still have insurance. We're still drinking wine, but we just saved $1,000 a year. And $1,000 a year that would have been invested 5 years ago and gone up 1,000%. What do you think that would have been, that $1,000? We just saved $1,000 on wine and insurance. And if we had done that 5 years ago and put it into the TQQ, today we would have $10,000.
Like, there's this attitude in law enforcement that I really disagree with, and it's the idea that we didn't sign up to do this job to make money. And while that's true, that wasn't my primary motivating factor to become a police officer. It is a factor that I think about. Like, I don't do this job for free. I couldn't do this job for free. And if tomorrow they said, you're going to do this job for free, I would quit and find a new job. And or even if they cut my pay in a quarter, I would quit and find a new job. So that's not feasible or realistic to say the money doesn't matter. And on top of that, the stress that being broke causes is then magnified when you go to a stressful job where you have to carry a gun and make life and death decisions in a split second. So adding financial stress outside of the job then makes decision making on the job worse. So does the money matter? Yes, it absolutely 100,000,000% matters. And I guess I would just like to get your opinion on kind of that idea that in some altruistic way, the money for a profession like this, like first responders, police, even military, that it doesn't matter. Does that make any sense to you at all? Yeah.
And the thing is, look, you're fortunate on one hand to have a job that you believe in. You're not working in a I worked one of the worst jobs I ever had, and unfortunately it was a limited period of time, but I worked in a bag company where, kind of like fertilizer bags and dog food bags, they have a ribbon on the end that's sewn on, and it's like I learned the job in 5 minutes, and then it was sheer boredom for the entire shift. But I was doing it to get money for college. But if you work in something like that, there's no sense of, oh, I'm really helping society here. So to have a job that you believe in is, good, because you see the personal reward. But by the same token, everyone has to deal with money. And I would also say that you want to have that attitude. There's nothing wrong with making money in addition to working for a good cause. In your case, it's law enforcement. It's keeping our civil society civil. I have 4 sisters. 2 of them are nuns. They took the vow of poverty. But guess what? They still have to deal with money. They run a school. My one sister is the principal of Pensacola High School. She has to hire teachers, pay the utility bills so that it's air conditioned, so there's an electric bill. The electric company doesn't say, oh, because you're a nun, we're going to just not charge you for your utility. So they have costs associated. I was talking to my older sister who for about 8 years had a tenure as she was the head of the order. And I said, what happens when your nuns get too old to work? And she goes, well, we have like a nursing home for them on the grounds of our mother home up in Connecticut. And I go, well, how do you afford that? And she goes, well, we have a pension that we put money aside. When they're working, they get paid by the archdiocese where they're working. They actually, they put their money into a pot, so to speak. It's funny when you think about it. Nuns are actually communists. They actually live in a communal living, so they're literally like communists. But when we talked to her, I talked to her and she said, well, we got a guy in New York that manages our funds. And when I actually got into this conversation that I didn't plan on having, it turned out the guy in New York was charging the Society of Nuns that my sister was in $500,000 to manage their funds. And I go, what? $500,000? And guess what, folks? Just like I told you, you see the blue line at the bottom, the S&P? You can barely see it. His management was performing under the blue line. He wasn't even doing what the S&P 500 was doing. So when you asked me before, as an example, should people do it on their own or go out and have professional management? I have seen time and time again where the so-called professional management isn't very professional. And so my sister learned enough in a short conversation that you don't need to be spending $500,000. I had another friend, same thing. She was having this guy in New York managing her total portfolio after selling her home was $100,000. The guy was charging her $5,000 a year to manage the money. $5,000 a year. I go, just move your money to Schwab. They won't charge you anything to have it there. So that saved her $5,000. In 10 years, that's $50,000. So it's not just a one-year decision. Well, how much is $1,000 going to be? Well, first of all, we just said it. $1,000 5 years ago would have been $10,000. But what if it's $1,000 next year and $1,000 a year after that, $1,000 a year after that? And if you got similar returns, which I'm not saying you will, I can't predict the future, but that would be $10,000 and $10,000 and $10,000. That would be $50,000 in 10 years. And all we did was save $50 a month on our insurance bill and went from $10 bottles of wine to $5 bottles of wine. What else could you save money on? So I don't mean that you got to live on oatmeal and water. You could make changes in your lifestyle that are so slight, you won't even notice them. And as far as the stress, you can get ahead. And yourself, to answer your question, if every police officer, hopefully, can feel secure that he's going to have some money in the bank. And then if his own personal car, the transmission goes out, if the transmission goes out and it's going to cost $3,000 to replace it, and you can't go to work anymore without, renting a car, that's a crisis. If your transmission goes out and you've got $5,000 in cash, it's just a pain in the butt but you've got the money. And money gives you options. You want to have options for yourself, for your family. It's creating your own social safety net so that you're going through life. It's not just a question of, well, I'm not going to get rich that way. there's a lot to be said for having $5,000 that you can draw on, right?
Yes,
because
that is absolutely
because
true.
you just feel, and let me say so. How would you feel if right now you had $1 million?
I'd feel pretty darn good.
You'd feel pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Now, by comparison, if I took Bill Gates and I said, Bill, presto changeo, now you're worth $1 million, he'd kill himself. Oh my God, I just lost $120 billion. And my point is, how you feel about it. You have an emotional relationship with money you don't even recognize. And by saving money, you're going to change that relationship to where you're not the victim, but you're the master. And if every month you're ahead, and maybe you're just ahead by $500, but you're going to feel better and better and better because you're increasingly getting wealthier. It's not how much you have that makes you happy. It's, is my life getting better? And so if I took Bill Gates and brought him down to $1 million, he would be suicidal. But if the average person had $1 million, they'd be on top of the world. And that goes to show exactly what I'm saying. You have an emotional relationship, and too often that emotional relationship that you have with money is an abusive relationship. You feel victimized, right? You feel like money's slapping you around and the world is controlling. You can't get ahead. And I'm saying you can change that. You in the collective sense, not just you, Anthony. You can change that by cutting costs and doing something else to bring in more money. Maybe it's changing jobs. Maybe it's just doing a side hustle. You know, maybe it's bartendering one night a week. Whatever it is, once you start getting even a modicum of safety built up, you're going to start feeling a bit better. You're going to breathe easier.
That's what you just said. Couldn't be more accurate. That your relationship with money and the ideas and concepts that you have behind it are going to dictate your success or not. Because I lived in a space where I started to really believe there are people in the world that have money and there are people in the world that don't. And no matter what I do, I'm just always going to be one of those people that doesn't have money. And then I started my own business, and then I sold that business, and now it's like, okay, you know, I'm not a millionaire by any means, but I've got enough to where when the transmission goes out on the car, I can pay for it, and I'm not freaking out. You know?
Right.
And just like you said, just that allows you for so much peace of mind, and that's worth $1 million right there.
Everyone's listening to this should recognize and ask themselves, what is my emotional relationship with money? And am I a victim or am I the master? And you want to become the master of it, right? Or at least where you have a little bit of comfort level.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to go tend to this child.